In the last episode, we were introduced to Nicole and Tony, who met in their 20s while in the military. Pretty quickly, the chips were stacked against them when a series of unfortunate events transpired, ultimately leading to Tony getting kicked out of the military and Nicole alone in Spain with a newborn baby. Coming up in this episode, Nicole finally makes it back to the States, albeit 4 hours away from her husband, but new challenges arose.
The next day, I got a call from my new job telling me the contract had been canceled. So no new job, no old job. What it turned into was multiple comments across multiple different years, across multiple different reasons. You know, how I wrote, how I talked, how I spoke to people. Oh, well, you know, I mean, and the bottom line was, I think, you know, he was embarrassed of me.
Welcome to Ex-Wives Undercover.
Liars, cheaters, and love cons.
I'm Amber.
And I'm Athena.
First, we told our story, and now we're sharing all of your craziest and most heart-wrenching stories of love gone wrong. Sometimes we laugh.
And sometimes we cry.
But more importantly,
we stand together. All right, girl. You ready to do this?
Let's do it.
The views, information, or opinions expressed on our show by our guests are solely the views of those individuals involved and by no means represent absolute facts. Opinions expressed by the host and guests may change at any time. Our podcast and YouTube show may at times cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to suicide, abuse, violence. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Before we jump back into the storyline, it's important to provide a bit more context to the dynamics of their relationship. Because Tony was older and higher ranking than Nicole in the military, this translated to him jabbing and belittling her throughout their years together. And this behavior started right from the get-go. Here's Nicole explaining one particular incident in the very early stages of their relationship.
You know, looking back, I think it was a fact-finding mission to find out all of the things, all of the idiosyncrasies. One of the things that happened, and I think I mentioned it in here. I said, oh, it would behoove you. Okay, now my bad. It's behoove. Okay, and I didn't know because I was a 23-year-old who was trying to, you know, articulate something that apparently I just hadn't looked it up. And this man called his mother and had her correct me.
Oh my gosh. Dang.
And I thought, and he framed it as cutesy and haha and oh, whatever. And, you know, now I see it for what it was the very, very start of trying to delegitimize my intelligence, make me feel stupid, make me feel reliant on him to correct me. Because obviously, you know, and, oh, well, I don't want anybody to think that you're stupid. So I want to make sure that I'm correcting you and not somebody else.
So underhanded.
But
wow.
but here's the thing. But here's the thing is that everything that he did was like right below the surface, and nothing that I can even point to. No one incident can I really point to and go, that was it. It was a combination of all of those things over the years. Death by 1,000 tiny cuts.
One of the things that studies show is that cluster B personality disorders are often a result of an interruption in personality development by abuse or trauma in childhood. Now, this certainly isn't to say Tony has a cluster B disorder, but it very well could have contributed to his issues as an adult. Here's Nicole again reflecting on Tony's childhood trauma and how it shaped him. There is a reason why he is the way he is. Doesn't give him an excuse for how he behaves, but it gives our listeners a little bit more background, and that's his childhood. And you kind of gave this little paragraph about his upbringing, and it really, people understand when he was really drunk and you guys were out, or he was out hiding in the field after that incident, he was like saying, you're going to abandon me. You're going to abandon me. There's there's probably a deep-seated reason why he was saying that. And also,
Yeah.
you guys will understand, the listeners, why someone would want to stay, because you feel bad for them and you give them a pass because they did have these circumstances as
Yeah.
children that kind of shaped who they are. So if you're
Yeah.
a loving, caring, compassionate person, you want to stick by them. And then it's like reverse psychology. Like, I will never leave you. You can treat me as bad as you want. Like, I will never leave you because I love you. And I
Right.
wouldn't do to you what your family did to you. Like, it
Right.
almost makes you want to
And
stay even more.
and that's the rub, isn't it? That's I think how a majority of these women find themselves in these situations, because they have an enormous amount of empathy and understanding for past things and behaviors, and why it explains, it informs the present, and this is why, and these are the steps that we have to take to try to help that person through that. I think that's, yeah, I mean, that definitely was a consideration on why so many things I kind of was like, okay, all right, until it got to the point where I was tired of making excuses for it. But obviously that took years to get to that point. Where I felt the treatment of me was so poor that I couldn't do it anymore. And I think I mentioned some of it in 2011, but like he had all of this childhood trauma from the situation that happened, and he never really did any work to try to fix it. And, honestly, his mother, his adopted mother, part of the reason why he hates women is her, and her treatment of him. And honestly, I don't even think that I know all of the stupid, terrible, evil things that she did to him. It was very Jerry Springer-like, and was a scenario that people probably should have gone to jail for and didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's all we need to say, because it did create the person that he is. And like you said, if he's not helping himself, it's not your job to help him too. And it's that kind of just cycle of like,
Right.
they have to acknowledge that they're broke and need help,
Well,
because
he went to therapy back in 1991, and that definitely is all he needed.
oh, in his mind, like, okay, I'm all fixed, I'm all better. Yeah, but
Yeah.
years of trauma isn't fixed overnight. It's an ongoing
No.
thing.
And, I think that the whole thing was a recipe to create a narcissist, frankly. And that's what we've ended up with.
Now let's get back to where we left off in the last episode. Nicole was finally back in the US and was stationed in Virginia while her husband Tony was 4 hours away in Washington, D.C. She had a newborn, was still having difficulties with her job in the military, and now Tony had suggested that she go and live with his sister. And let's just say that did not go over so well.
His sister lives in Norfolk, and he came up with the bright idea that me and my newborn, in my depressed state, should meet his sister for the first time and live with them. So I was living with his sister and her husband, who, by the way, called him every day to complain about me, and that I wasn't cleaning, I wasn't helping, I was trying to leave my son with her all the time, just complaining. Now, what did my husband do with this information? Oh, he doubled down, agreed with her, and then talked to me and told me that I needed to change my behaviors. So I left in July and got an apartment, which my mom helped me pay for. She paid pretty much almost all of my rent, because it was like $950 a month for a 600 square foot apartment.
Were you able to get on any types of meds or counseling or anything at that time?
Yes and no. I was able to get on medication, that, as I'm sure you can understand, the military mental health system is not great. um, so they put me on, I believe, what the hell was I on? Zoloft. And if you've ever been on a variation of SSRIs, this particular one made me feel nothing. I felt no highs, no lows, no joy, no sadness, just food, which I think at the time is probably what I needed to just turn off everything. But the back end of that, because I couldn't feel any joy, I also missed out on things during his first year of development.
Nicole couldn't catch a break, and the military was relentlessly trying to put her on nights, even though she couldn't find infant care. As a result, she once again had to put in a package for a hardship separation. After meeting with the command master chief, he gave her the option to either proceed with the separation or continue with a guarantee that she would have a day shift and not deploy. She couldn't turn it down. And in her own words, she said,
"I couldn't turn it down, as I knew they would have made my life a living hell."
But as a result of this decision, there was a lot of hate towards her from her coworkers. Once her military career was officially over, Nicole moved to Maryland, where they had purchased a home. The stress of everything was amplified because now she was driving 81 miles to and from work with a car that got only 12 miles per gallon. Additional purchases of nearly $10,000 in furniture, along with a laundry list of expenses, led to them having to file for bankruptcy because they just couldn't make it work.
So in part because I had to move out of his sister's house and we were maintaining two households, even with my mother's help, it was too much. And I had credit card debt that, I probably spent more than I should have because I was trying to fill a fucking void. We didn't fall under the median income, which I believe for a 3-person household in Maryland was like $81,000 a year. And we made more than that, so we didn't qualify for the liquidation, which is Chapter 7.
Over the next few years, they had their ups and downs, but it wasn't all bad. It eventually came to a head, though. Tony started working late a lot and was at a separate location than Nicole, so they lived together but separately, if that makes sense. She started entertaining other conversations with ex-boyfriends just to feel something. Tony was absent emotionally and didn't understand that Nicole wanted more than he was giving her. He was just keeping his head down and trying to make it through, and she felt trapped.
The one story I tell people all the time is there was one time it took me 7.5 hours to get home. And that was when I decided, I was like, I need to get the fuck out of here. I can't do this anymore. And I felt stuck. And I had gained a lot of weight, and I had started losing weight because I was like, I need to do something for myself to get myself in a better mental space. He just was, let's nose to the grindstone, stay the course kind of thing. And I'm sitting here over there screaming like, I need help. Can't do this anymore. So I felt like I was screaming at the rooftop going, hey, I need things to change. And things weren't changing. February of 2011, I went down to Florida and visited my parents. And it was during that trip I was like, I'm moving. I can't do this anymore. Our son was getting ready to be 5. He was going to start kindergarten in a year or two. There's no way I can leave him 81 miles away from me across a bridge that it could take me 7.5 hours to get to him. I couldn't do it. So I was having panic attacks just even thinking about the future of having to be stuck here, because I felt trapped. I felt stuck. I felt like I couldn't do it. So I one March, I think, I was like, look, I want to separate. I gotta go. With that, it was a whole bunch of discussions of let's try, crying, all of the stuff, all of a sudden now we want to try. And couldn't understand where it was coming from, even though I'm like, I'm sitting here, what I feel like is I'm screaming to you for help. I'm drowning and you won't even throw me a life preserver, is what it felt like.
So, what was his response when you said, I want a separation and I want to move back to Florida? Was he like, sure, or like, let's fight to save this marriage? I will move to Florida with you? Or was there any pushback on that?
I think there was at first. I said, we had many talks and I finally agreed to do counseling, but I said, you get your own counselor, I get my own counselor, and then we have a marriage counselor, and that's the only way I'm doing it. By July of 2011, we had moved down to Florida, and things were good for about year and a half, 2 years maybe, before stuff started popping up again and old habits started resurfacing, staying late at work, doing this, doing that. Like the patterns reemerged.
I think it's important also to point out, because this was something that he told you, that if you guys work on it, that you are never ever to say you want a divorce or separation ever again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he said, if I move to Florida, he's like, don't ever threaten me with this again. And I said, okay, I promise that.
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, I think he banked on that in the end. And obviously that was not what ended up happening. He said, don't ever, this is it. And I said, okay, I'm all in. That's it. Like, this is it. And like I said, we were going to theme parks as a family. We were going out. We were doing things on the weekends. Things were fun. We were, and it was like, but he can't maintain it. There was like a little mini love bombing where, he got me an engagement ring that he had never gotten one for me before. I got, jewelry and flowers and this and that. And, there was a lot of gift giving and things, because I think, that's his love language. And it never really was mine. I'm not a big gift person. I could care less about what the gift is, more the thought behind it. You could get me a pen, and if it's my favorite pen and you're like, here's your pen, I'm like, this is the best pen I've ever had. I don't need it to be a Gucci pen or a name brand pen. I just wanted to be thought of. And I think, the overlap here with a lot of women in a lot of their marriages that aren't necessarily even with toxic people, just in general, we also had the regular everyday man-woman problems about, how do you divide the household duties? How do you, and the mental load, and all of that ended up being put on me.
How did the counseling go? Was that consistent? And, because 2
Yeah,
years.
I mean, I felt, after having a couple of months, I felt heard. He was making what I believed to be meaningful changes. He wasn't being so negative about things, because that was part of my thing. I was like, you're so negative about everything. And I was always more glass half full, power of positive thinking. If I think we'll have it happen, it's going to happen. I just got to put my mind to it. To constantly listen to everybody, to him poo-poo every idea, every thought, it was just like.
By the end of 2013, things were not going well for Nicole at work, and she began having panic attacks, even sending her to the ER.
2013, the job that I had accepted, I actually got 2 job offers within like 4 hours of each other, and I had a choice to make. I could either work SOCOM, or I could work at CENTCOM, 2 totally different buildings, but they called SOCOM HappyCom, and they called CENTCOM SADCOM. That was just the vernacular that people used. And the job at CENTCOM also had potential for deployment. And so I didn't really want to do that, because I was like, I don't really want to be deployed. That's the whole reason I got out of the military. In most part, that I didn't want to do that. So I was like, oh, let me just choose this job. Let me take a step back. I'll just be an executive assistant no responsibilities, just, whatever. And so what a nightmare that turned out to be. I chose incorrectly, but that was because I misjudged the culture of the location. The location here in Tampa is an Air Force base, and they have a different culture than the Navy does. It didn't matter where I turned. It was always something, there was always some fight or flight turmoil where things were just out of control. And so yeah, I ended up was having panic attacks, and I thought I was having chest pain. And I went to the ER. We got a scan done, and they were like, "You're fine. It's just panic." And I was like, "Great." And then I found out a week later that I was pregnant. And he said, "I don't want to keep it." He's like, "Well, you were just in the ER and had that CT scan. They probably irradiated, yada, yada." And I was like, "That's not unreasonable." And, I was like, okay, that's, better than running the risk. And I was already, I think at that point in 2013, I was 33. So I was like right on the cusp of geriatric pregnancy at that point. And so I was like, and in retrospect, I don't regret it. I'm not upset about that. I don't know that it was the wrong decision, but what it did do is cause my hormones to be like this in the midst of all of that turmoil at work. The beginning of 2014, I had found another job that I thought was in the same building. I put in my notice for that job, and the next day I got a call from my new job telling me the contract had been canceled. So no new job, no old job. They had already replaced me. I was out of work for the longest period of time that I was out of work for 5 months. I signed back up to go to college because I was like, well, if I can't find a job, let me go back to college and at least get the GI Bill.
We had previously heard about how Tony nitpicked Nicole. But when she went back to school to get her degree, the power imbalance was perceived as a threat. Let's hear from Nicole to get her perspective on the shift that happened around this time in their marriage.
What it turned into was multiple comments across multiple different years, across multiple different reasons, how I wrote, how I talked, how I spoke to people. Oh, well, and the bottom line was, I think, he was embarrassed of me, period. Why that is, I have no idea. I'm not him, so I don't know. But that embarrassment went on to our son. He would correct him repeatedly in public. He would take him into the bathroom and spank him if he acted out in public. If, we didn't go out to eat, Amber, for 3 years. We did not go anywhere with him in a restaurant because he was too, terrified, I think, of being embarrassed. How anybody who's never been through any sort of abusive situation can sit there in judgment of another person. Well, you know what? Never in a fucking million years did I think that I'd be the victim of fucking mental and emotional abuse, but here the fuck I am. And, it was, I think, the best description, the slow boil of the frog.
Yes.
It didn't happen. He didn't lead with kicking me under the table. That was something that happened way, way many years down the road. We didn't let that mask slip right away. Mm-hmm. And then, so I think, looking back kind of what happened, I think he thought of himself as, because he was higher ranking than me, he outranked me, you know what I mean? Kind of in his mind. And so he was more powerful than me in the military, and then he got kicked out. And so that power dynamic shifted in his mind, not in mine, but in his mind it did. And so then every action you can see him trying to regain the power dynamic. And it wasn't like I asked for it to change. It just, in his mind, it did. Because that was his identity, and then it was taken away. And who am I without the military? And who am I? And so then all of the subsequent years were him struggling to try to find out where he belonged, what he wanted to do. And, really we had to deal with the fallout from that.
By mid-2014, Tony went to Nicole and asked her if it would be okay for him to start his own business. He already had an LLC that he was managing that was involved with the import of weapons from Switzerland. The new company would be to have a US side of the Swiss company. She certainly didn't want to be the reason he didn't seize this opportunity. But this career move eventually led to the demise of their marriage and Nicole being blindsided by what she was about to discover.
Next time on Ex-Wives Undercover.
Like, what could possibly stir him up? I mean, you're in Hawaii, for goodness sakes. Like,
Me. I mean, I think the lead up to all of that year, I was fairly checked out too. You know, I mean, he wasn't alone in the pulling away. I was checked out. I think before the Brazil trip, there was a hurricane that was headed towards Florida, and he was flying out of Miami. And it was this big, like, I have to change my flight to leave early, and I have to, and I was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, why are you rushing to get out of here? And he and I had like a huge fight about it because I was like, this is insane. I said, you're insane. He was like, okay, I'll try to make time later today. And it was another one of those, you know, I could tell I was being blown off.
yeah.
And so I said, I know I'm not young and Ukrainian. I was like, but I'd like a little attention.
Oh yeah.
And
Take
the phone.
that, you dumbass.
And the phone.
He probably shit himself.
He said, what did you mean by that?
And once again, if you like what you're hearing, please leave us a 5-star review and make sure to join our private Facebook group for even more juicy info. You can also find us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And of course, you can always visit our site at www.exwivesundercover.com.